I am back. Hi, everyone. I just took a week off for those of you who weren't aware because talking about politics full time is a lot. And sometimes it's just nice to take some time, connect to myself, make sure I stay clear, get off of social media, experience real life, and come back stronger than ever. And that's what I've done. So I missed y'all, and I've been looking forward to doing this live stream. We got three topics that we're going to be talking about today on Nuanced. The first is about the Texas floods that have tragically taken many lives, including the lives of children who were at a camp near the river that got flooded. The second thing we're going to talk about is the Epstein files, or lack thereof, and reflections on this whole Epstein release and what the Attorney General Pam Bondi said was going to be coming versus what we got. And then the last thing is going to be about, I guess, Elon versus Trump round two, and Elon's announcement over the weekend that he's going to found the America Party and how we should think about that, because some people have been asking me for my opinion on it, and I want to give you my opinion as it currently stands. And I'm also open to discussion with you guys right on the live stream so that we can develop a collective opinion. So let's start off by talking about the flood. And for a little bit of context here, this morning I actually was going to be on Piers Morgan's show to talk about this. So I thought about this in preparation for that, but that ended up not actually happening. So I guess you get my take here. You're not going to hear it on Piers Morgan. So lucky you, you're watching, you get to hear my take on it. So the obvious thing is that this was a tragedy. And anytime there's a loss of human life, we should just pause and put politics aside for a second and just acknowledge that's awful. And it's awful even if it was preventable or if it was not preventable. It's awful if it was a natural disaster. It's awful if people made mistakes. It's always awful. And that said, after every tragedy, after anything that goes wrong, the first question we should ask after we've just held space for the sanctity of life is, how could this have been prevented? And politics is the act of governing a specific area. So when an area is impacted in a way that the inhabitants of that area are negatively impacted by, i.e. death, it's a natural and necessary part of human life to ask questions. And asking questions about, hey, how could we have governed better? How could we have had better systems? How could we have had better leadership to prevent that? Is politics. So I was asked, what do I think of the politicization of the Texas floods? Because for some of you who maybe haven't been following this, on the left, people are pointing to Trump's cuts and the cuts that Doge made to areas like the National Weather Service that might have, they argue, impacted the number of lives that could have been saved. And some people on the right are saying that's disgusting and you're politicizing things. We have to talk about political ramifications of things in order to make sure that we address any political issues. So I don't think politicization is a problem. What I do think a problem is that when people politicize before understanding the facts or the counterfactual of the situation, it gets in the way of constructive solutions, and instead it becomes about division and pointing the finger at who's to blame, rather than pointing the finger at the solution. And instead of being focused on preventing the loss of human life in the future, people will focus on which tribe should be scoring points over the other tribe. And I think that's what people are saying when they say they don't like stuff like this being politicized. But politics is an inevitable part of any civilizational issue because politics is how we run civilization. So here's some context because there's just a lack of clarity about the actual timeline here. First, so everyone understands, before the flood happened, the National Weather Service did issue warnings on an adequate time frame. And in fact, they even increased staff in some of the affected areas that night, knowing that a flash flood could happen. But the core failure here was that the forecast that they gave severely underestimated the rainfall. Now, why did that happen? And it underestimated the rainfall by about 2/3. So the actual rainfall was triple what they estimated. That's not necessarily a staffing issue. That's a limitation of meteorological models, especially in unpredictable terrain like Texas Hill Country. So flash floods are inherently unpredictable. Because of the marvels of modern science, we've gotten a lot better at predicting the weather, but there's still going to be an error rate no matter what. And there's going to be an error rate even if we infinitely fund a project and it has all the staffing that it needs. So let's understand that is the primary issue. Everyone was caught off guard because they underestimated how bad the flood would be. And I don't know about you guys and where you live, but you probably get notices all the time on, at least where I live. I actually live in Topanga, California. It's a very mountainous area where we have tons of weather warnings all the time. So it can be easy when you're getting weather warnings regularly to not take any particular one seriously. But that was the first failure, that they underestimated how much flooding there would be. The second failure was local, and it well predates the actual flooding. So in Kerr County, which was the area affected by the floods, they don't have a flood siren or reverse 911 system to wake people up in the middle of the night. So you guys know when you get like an Amber Alert or you get an alert of some sort of natural disaster and it buzzes your phone. Well, not everyone's phone has an audible override, and not everyone even has their phone necessarily on or around them. Let's say if you're camping somewhere, maybe you have your phone somewhere that's not immediately accessible, or for some reason it's on or off, or it's on airplane mode, or you don't have reception, right? So the idea of having a flood siren system is you would have some sort of physical device that blares a really loud noise when there's an urgent disaster that people need to be aware of, and you want to make sure that everyone hears it. Residents of that area voted to not have a flood siren system. And to be clear, that's not an indictment of the residents. They just judged, hey, it's not worth the money to us when we consider how much investment it would take versus how often we would need it. It's not worth it to us. That's what they decided. That wasn't a federal decision. That was a local governance choice. So reportedly, the community just didn't want to fund it. So that was the second failure. So the first failure is you underestimate how much flooding there is going to be. The second failure is that you prepare for, or rather, you don't invest in certain systems that could have helped in this situation. The third thing, and this is on the Trump administration, but again, there's nuance here. So before we react, I want you to just listen to this. One role that might have helped is called a WMC, or a warning coordination meteorologist. This is someone who on the staff within the meteorology team says, oh, okay, I'm seeing something in the forecast data that indicates that we might have an emergency. I'm now going to coordinate with local governance structures to make sure that the people in the town know and they're adequately prepared. That is a role that was cut under Doge at the recommendation of Doge. And that happened under Trump. In the absence of having this WMC, there was still someone doing that responsibility. That responsibility was given to the meteorologist in charge that particular night. The meteorologist in charge did not contact Camp Mystic, which was the camp that had several children who sadly died. We don't know why the meteorologist in charge or the MIC didn't contact the camp. It might have been that they were overwhelmed. It might have been that they didn't think that the flood was going to be that out of control. It might have been that they weren't used to the role and they were used to doing other things that are required of a meteorologist, but not coordinating with local officials. And it might be that if that role hadn't been cut under the Trump administration, lives would have been saved. It's possible. That's a real and serious question. That said, and this is not to at all belittle the loss of life that happened here. More staffing might have helped. And also, we live in a world of finite resources. And it's very easy in hindsight to always say, well, we should have funded that thing because if we had funded that thing, this bad thing wouldn't have happened in the present. But when we're making decisions in the present, we, of course, don't have perfect information about the future. So it's much easier to justify something in hindsight, much harder to ascertain whether you need to have it in foresight. So the deeper question here is whether cutting that specific role was a mistake at the time or whether it was a calculated risk that simply didn't pay off. I don't know. what the answer is there, which I know is unsatisfying. And it's much easier to say, oh, well, everything that happened under the Trump administration is bad. Everything that he did is bad. He's to blame for everything. I do think that he has responsibility for the impact of his staffing cuts, to be absolutely clear. But when we're assigning responsibility, it's on a spectrum. There's a kind of responsibility that we assign someone when they're grossly negligent, where it's like, look, even in foresight, this was a really bad decision. Now, to give you the what is it, the contrapositive, or maybe there's a converse. Let's look at the LA fires. Now, I live in LA and I lived through the LA fires. During the LA fires, Gavin Newsom was saying that Trump was politicizing the situation. And again, as I said, anytime there's a tragedy, you need to talk about the politics of the situation. But I think what Newsom was more saying is that Trump is being an opportunist, and he's not focused on solving the actual problem. And I think it's fair to say that he was an opportunist, and a lot of his rhetoric was him playing political football, which all politicians do. That said, with the LA fires, there were several things going on that were clearly bad in foresight, not just hindsight. For example, the fact that the fire hydrants didn't have enough water. That's due to a fact that the infrastructure in the city, in the city of LA, couldn't handle the amount of throughput that would be needed for serious fires. But serious fires happen all the time, or regularly, especially when the Santa Ana winds happen in January. So that's something that you could have some foresight into the situation and say, hey, there's a reasonable claim to be made here that a bad decision was made, and it was clearly foreseeable as bad. But even that is, maybe you could say, okay, well, updating the infrastructure for that is really expensive, and the LA fires were kind of like a freak once in several decade situation, and it doesn't make sense to invest infrastructure for that kind of situation. Okay, well, there's other critiques. For example, the LA Fire Department was under budget, and they actually told Mayor Karen Bass, hey, in the case of an emergency, we are not prepared. Okay, that's different than having a forecast that's bad. That's different than even cutting one specific role that arguably could have been helpful and trying to offload the responsibilities of that role to someone else. That's a systemic issue in a fire department that is communicating to local officials that they don't have enough money. And then compounding that fact is the fact that in that low resource environment, they were devoting some of their money to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And even if you think that diversity, equity, inclusion is really important, diversity, equity, inclusion is not a priority when you don't have enough money to take care of core safety needs as a fire department. Another thing, people talk about the reservoir. There was a reservoir in the Palisades, or the one that supplies Pacific Palisades, was empty. And that reservoir was empty for months. Why was it empty for months? Because the maintenance process for that reservoir took way too long, the better part of a year. So during that time, the primary source of water that could have served Pacific Palisades was empty. Now, that's not the exact reason why there wasn't enough water in the fire hydrants, because the reason there wasn't enough water in the fire hydrants is because they could not handle the amount of throughput required to get the water into the fire hydrants. However, if the Pacific Palisades reservoir would have been full, some speculate that because of its positioning, right, it uses more gravity, right? They put the reservoir there because it's easier to pump water from there as opposed to somewhere far away. That could have had a significant impact on quelling the fires. So in this specific case, I'm not an expert on meteorology. I'm not an expert on staffing the National Weather Service. It may be that the decision to cut the WMC in this case was a bad decision, even in foresight. And that's something that I would like to see everyone who's involved go and look at and say, hey, do we actually need this role? And was it a bad decision from first principles to cut this role in the first place? But the point I'm making here is that it's important to talk about politics when situations like this happened. There were local things that could have been done to at least make sure that there was a more reliable local siren system so that everyone in the area knew, hey, there's a flash flood happening, you're in danger, you need to evacuate. And there might have been key roles that, if they were in place, would have increased the odds of people not dying. And I think if that's unsatisfying because people just like to hear it's like it's left or it's right, it's Trump or it's Kamala, it's Newsom or it's Trump. A better way to look at this is, hey, what decisions were made? Were they justifiable decisions at the time? And how do we make better decisions going forward? Rather than constantly pointing the finger left and right. And we're all guilty of it sometimes, right? We all can become tribal sometimes. Me too, right? I know during the LA fires, I was definitely really upset at the leftist government. And I thought, well, I still am mad at the leftist government for what it's worth, because I thought that they made a lot of decisions that in foresight were bad decisions. But even so, even when we want to place the responsibility squarely on a single party, we still need to make sure that we're assigning it fairly based on the risk factors and the counterfactuals that could have obtained if we made a different set of decisions. Okay. Hopefully that all makes sense. Now let's talk about the Epstein files, because that's what's hot right now, right? So for those of you who are not up to date, Jeffrey Epstein was someone who was prosecuted in, I believe it was the early 2000. His situation was going on in around like 2008 and the 20 teens, right? So the Epstein case, which was a case where there was essentially a high level sex trafficking ring of pedophiles who were allegedly people like members of upper society, were molesting kids. And Jeffrey Epstein, who was considered the mastermind of this ring, was put in jail. And then while he was in jail, he died. And some people claim that he killed himself. That was the official story. Some people claim that no, he didn't kill himself. In fact, he was actually killed because he was connected to a bunch of powerful people who didn't want him to rat on them or otherwise compromise them. What happened is we just got a message from the Department of Justice saying this. And I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but here's a salient piece. The systematic review. What? Let's make this bigger. This thing is way too small. Okay, you guys can read it. I can't read it. There we go. The systematic review revealed no incriminating client list, i.e., the Epstein client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. Okay. A lot of people are upset about that. Why? Well, let's talk about the expectations that were set. So, speculation about the Epstein case has been going on for more than a decade. And Trump, I actually don't know what Trump's impetus for even making this campaign promise, but one of his campaign promises was that he was going to declassify and release a lot of the Epstein files, along with the JFK files and the Martin Luther King files. He gave that responsibility to the acting attorney general, or current attorney general, Pam Bondi. There was an incident several months ago where there was this big announcement, hey, we're going to be releasing the Epstein files, and they invited a bunch of mostly right-wing influencers to the White House, and they gave them these binders that showed Epstein files, and there was this whole media circus around it, which bothered a lot of people because it kind of felt in poor taste to be talking about the abuse of little children, as it just felt weird. It felt like there was way too much celebration of the moments, but optics aside, the idea was that the public was going to get information about this high-level sex trafficking ring, and that hopefully that would lead to justice being served. And then they released the Epstein files that they had, and it was a big nothing burger. Pretty much no new interesting information came out of that release. And it was very disappointing, and a lot of people were upset. Then Pam Bondi and her subordinate, Kash Patel, who's the head of the FBI, said, okay, well, we got more coming. Now, for several months, Pam Bondi has been going on news shows and talk shows saying, yeah, we're working through the files. We got to redact some of it to protect the victim. But yes, you will receive the files. And at some point they said, hey, we have tens of thousands of videos of illicit activity implicating people. We have flight logs and lists of names and all this stuff. And in one notorious incident, or now notorious incident, a reporter asked Pam Bondi, hey, are we going to get the Epstein client list, and Pam Bondi said, the client list is on my desk. The list is on my desk. So there's something that just feels really incongruent and really inconsistent about this messaging to a lot of people about, hey, all of a sudden there is no client list. I want to provide some context for how to think about this, though, because and I kind of fell into this trap when I started investigating the Epstein stuff myself. The Epstein client list is not something that was ever proven to actually exist. What people actually refer to as the Epstein client list is a combination of several different things. One, there's the Epstein flight logs, and it's flight logs from to and from Epstein's island. And then there's a physical artifact, a black book that was found on Jeffrey Epstein called the Little Black Book. Both those flight logs and the Little Black Book contained names, some innocent, some suspicious, of people who had dealings with Epstein. And to be clear, just because someone was on a flight log to Epstein's island doesn't mean that they participated in all the things going on in Epstein's island, because Epstein was a really well-connected person who knew a lot of people and rubbed a lot of shoulders with a lot of people. That said, I think it's fair to say that some subset of people going to that island were participating or at least knew about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, because this wasn't a case of him taking advantage of one child or two or even dozen. This was at least 100 verified incidents, if not hundreds of verified incidents of children being abused. So it is very likely that it's not just Jeffrey Epstein or the woman who was his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, was in on this. It's likely that there were other people in on this. And across multiple administrations, no one but those two people were actually prosecuted. So I think what the Epstein client list represents to people is, hey, are we going to get names, and are we going to see heads roll, and are we going to see people actually go to prison for this? Because if we can't find the political will to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law people who are hurting kids, like, what are we even doing as a country? I think that's why people are really frustrated. And me, I'm very disappointed here. And with all that said, the idea that there was an Epstein client list, like some list of people who Epstein had video evidence on and was blackmailing, was always a rumor. So I'm open to the possibility that, yeah, this was just a rumor that persisted so long and so strongly, it took on a life of its own, and no Epstein client list ever existed. But what I think people want to know is, well, why has no one gone to prison? How have we had investigations of this for over a decade and no one's gone to prison? And that's where people suspect either incompetence or foul play. Now, some people have said, oh, well, this is Trump getting involved in a cover-up and he's lying. And I don't think that's very likely, because I think of it, if we think of things probabilistically, frankly, I was surprised that Trump said he's going to declassify the Epstein list, because he didn't have to, and it wasn't like a significant part of his platform. I'm pretty sure he would have gotten elected without promising to divulge the Epstein list. It doesn't make sense to me to say, well, Trump is trying to cover up for himself, or he's covering up for other people that he knows, because there was not that much upside to making the promise in the first place. Now, I guess you could argue, well, maybe he didn't know who was on the list, and then he found out who was on the list, and then he started to cover up for them. Honestly, you know what I think happened here? I think it's a combination of two things. One, I think that the Trump administration and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and all these people who are making this huge spectacle out of the release of the Epstein list got way over their skis, and they set expectations way too high, and they let the public down, because the public actually thought that they had something, not that they knew that they had something, when they don't actually have something. I think it's partially that. I don't think it's some grand conspiracy that Pam Bondi and Trump and Kash Patel are in on. So I put it on the side of incompetence more so than malevolence. That said, there's a deeper question of why has it been this long across administrations and only two heads have rolled on what is clearly some sort of criminal conspiracy? And that's where I believe that, yeah, this is power at work. And maybe there are some people actively trying to cover up what some of these elites were doing behind closed doors. And you know what I think a lot of it is? I just don't think there's enough political will for a lot of people to really get into the trenches and really investigate this to the fullest extent of the law, because there's so much political blowback that happens when powerful people are being held accountable. And that's a sad truth about power more generally. And I don't even think it's just America. I think this happens with elites pretty much across societies. Elites get to get a different set of rules than the normal person does. And that's a really frustrating part about this. And as someone who was really excited when I voted for Trump, and this was one of the reasons, not that I voted for Trump, but this was one of the reasons I was excited. I was like, cool, let's get some transparency. I think we got some transparency. I'm not convinced they went above and beyond, and that's just sheer speculation on my part. And I think they mismanaged expectations really, really badly. And now trust has been broken, and that's what's leading people to speculate, oh no, they're just lying. And I actually don't think they're just lying. I mean, I remember even when there's the original conversation about the V1 release of the Epstein list under Pam Bondi, or Epstein list, the Epstein files under Pam Bondi. You guys will recall that there was this whole public spectacle of Pam Bondi writing a letter to Kash Patel and disclosing it publicly and saying, hey, someone in the FBI, in a local district of the FBI, is refusing to comply with us. I think there's something to that, because remember, when a new administration takes over, the executive branch doesn't change entirely. Like, there are thousands of people in the executive branch. A percentage of the executive branch changes, like the cabinet changes, obviously the president changes. But there's a larger apparatus, which is a lot of the time what people call the deep state, that doesn't change. And my concern is what people call the deep state is intractable. When we want actual change, it's very hard to actually get the truth. And yeah, if people actually were complicit in a cover-up, I think it happened within the deep state, not within the Trump administration. So that's my read. As with all things, it's always probabilistic. Is there a possibility that the Trump administration realized something when they got out of office and they're lying and they're trying to cover it up? It's possible. I honestly don't think it's that important to them. I think it was just something that they wanted to check the box on. They provided some level of transparency. They provided some video of the place where Epstein was staying to show, hey, look, no one was entering the establishment. We did get more information than we had before, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm not very satisfied. And I think this speaks to a level of deep dissatisfaction that many Americans have about how the whole situation was handled. And I think it's both a lesson in expectation management, like don't overpromise things that you don't actually have, because it really did sound like they had something. And in unfortunately, this is unsatisfying, but I don't really have an answer. And like, how do we have justice actually be served when something as abhorrent as children getting abused at a scale happens? Because 2 people going to jail is just not enough. But that's where we're at. Okay. So before we talk about Elon and Trump and the America Party, I just want to read the chat, see what you guys are thinking, read out some of the best comments, and we'll get to that. I say this every time, but some people, you tune in at different times. Not everyone knows this. When I do these live streams, everyone, I stream to Facebook, YouTube, X, and Instagram at the same time. I do not have a way to monitor the chat from all of the platforms at once. I can monitor, I think, X, YouTube, and Facebook simultaneously. Instagram is usually off of screen, and Instagram is where the smallest audience is. The result of that is that sometimes on Instagram, I do not see people's comments. If I don't see your comments, I'm sorry. It's not because I'm ignoring you, unless it's a dumb comment. I just often don't see it. So don't take it personally if I don't see your comment. And also, I get lots of comments, so I can't respond to them all. Okay, so now let's read the chat, see what people are saying about the Epstein files. And the floods, actually. So I talked about that first. Oh, and people are just saying, welcome back. Thank you, everyone. It's good to be back. Thank you for making me feel welcome. Okay. Yeah, people are pointing out that, yeah, there was a flash flood warning, and there were alarms going off in that Texas flood situation. Yeah, and the argument is that if they had invested in a local siren system, maybe they would have gotten an extra even 30-minute warning which could save lives. And by a 30-minute warning, I mean like the local warning, like literally like people like you and me getting the warning could have happened faster. And I'm not saying that they made the wrong decision because the local residents voted against having that local siren system, but that's something where proactively looking forward is like, hey, maybe actually it makes sense to invest in this kind of system. And the second thing is, as I mentioned, that particular role, the is that what did I call it? The WMC, which was the warning coordination meteorologist. That's a role that was cut under the Trump administration, and that's a role that where someone from the meteorology team coordinates with the local officials when they see that an emergency might happen, and then they tell local officials, "Hey, you need to prepare." Now that role didn't exist because that was one of the Doge cuts, but that role was taken on by the meteorologist in charge on that particular night. It's unclear whether the meteorologist in charge did the role that the warning coordination meteorologist would have done. And if they didn't do the full role, it may be because they were overwhelmed and they had other things to do. So this is a situation where, again, when you make any kind of staffing cut, there's risk. And it is awful when that risk results in the loss of human life. But there's always a risk in the loss of human life when you're cutting services. It's not a reason to infinitely invest in a service. It's a reason to make sure that you're only making the right cuts and nothing past that. So there's a good question of, did they cut something that they shouldn't have cut? And could they known that they shouldn't have cut it in foresight? So yes, thank you, Brenna, for saying that. Oh, it's an interesting comment from someone. I don't know if this is true, but we're gonna put it up. Hopefully, you're giving me proper information. Given the fact that you capitalize everything perfectly and everything, I assume you got this from somewhere that you copy pasted. Representative Julian Castro and Senator Chuck Schumer blamed Trump era cuts to the National Weather Service for the lack of flood warnings, but cuts wouldn't take effect until October 2025. That is interesting. You know what? That's a great comment. Thank you, Mark. You know what we're gonna do? We're gonna take that comment and we're gonna do some research on our AI together. We're gonna see if it's if that lines up. So we've done this before. I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna share my screen. And we're gonna look this up together. This will be a little lesson on how to think for yourself and get the truth. Okay. I want to show you guys ChatGPT. All right. Hopefully you guys can see that. So you guys can see all the stuff that I looked up. So I just took a screenshot of that comment from Mark, and I'm just gonna ask ChatGPT, verify, is this true? And this is a little insight into my plan. Oh, well, that didn't work. All right, here. Someone told me that the Trump cuts to the National Weather Service don't take effect until October 2025. Is that true? Okay, the proposed cuts to the NOAA, including the National Weather Service, are part of the fiscal year 2026 budget. The budget becomes effective October 1st, 2025. So yes, any reductions tied to fiscal year 2026 don't formally take effect until October 1, 2025. Interesting. So have any cuts been made to NOAA that are already in effect due directly to the actions of the Trump administration? I love this. See? It's like someone in the chat gives me something interesting to look up. We look it up. We get the truth together. Let's see what it says. Okay, so there were some cuts already. So they hired probationary employees. There were layoffs already. Okay, so we don't need to read about all the layoffs. So Trump's administration already enacted meaningful reductions at NOAA right now, not just in the fiscal year 2026. Cool. Good. Glad we know the truth. All right. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that little demonstration. Unplanned there. But yeah, this is why it's important. When we hear facts, we want to make sure that we verify them ourselves and evaluate them in context, right? Because it's true. The budget cuts don't take place until later, but they already cut off some probationary staff now. So there have been cuts that the Trump administration made to the National Weather Service. And here's the thing, it's always easy to justify doing more. You're never going to look like the good guy for cutting things, right? Like it's always easy to say, well, if we had just spent more money, if we had more staff, we would have avoided this. But we don't have infinite money. And if we just keep on spending on everything to manage risk, eventually we're not going to have any money. And that's the biggest risk. So again, the proper question is, were there cuts made that in foresight, it's clear they shouldn't have been made? And for the cuts that were made, did we try to make up for those cuts in critical areas with other methods? Like, for example, the meteorologist in charge taking over the role of the warning coordination meteorologist. That's a question, and it's beyond my ability to discern on this specific role, because that would be something that we want to hear testimony from the National Weather Service on. And I hope that we get a report later with them illustrating their findings on this whole tragedy, so that the chances of this tragedy are minimized to whatever degree possible. But that's a nuance I just want to invite everyone to consider here. All right, so great comments. Thank you for that. Give me the fun opportunity to show you guys how I use AI, and I hope you guys got something out of that. Let's keep on looking here. Okay, someone made a comment. Someone just said I trying to blindly deport undocumented immigrants. That is not at all what I've said ever. And if you watch the show, you know I don't say things that way. So I don't know how I lost you. I'm not sure what you read, but I recommend you go back to and watch my videos on immigration. I have a very nuanced take on immigration, and a proposal for how to deport people humanely that I haven't seen anyone else say. So I encourage you to look at that. Great question. Thank you, Mark R. I love this. This is the kind of engagement I like to see. So I'm going to highlight you. In a better political world, how would we respond to a disaster like this? What would a no-spin, action-first approach to flood recovery actually look like? Great question. Thank you. This is what we need. Constructive problem solving. Well, thinking about this in real time, right? So give me a second. Well, I think the first thing would be a commitment, like by the leaders, not just to like condemn. Like, I hate this culture of people just like, I condemn these actions, or it's just like feels like you know exactly what the politician is going to say every time something bad happens. And I get it's fine, like show solidarity with the people. I just wish it was a lot more sincere. But the first step that should happen after that is, hey, we're going to commit to commissioning a report to understanding what exactly happened here. That would be the most sane thing to do, because situations like this are always complicated. And it was complicated during the LA fires too. So that would be the first thing you would expect from a leader. A leader would say, hey, we're going to commission a report to figure out how this happened. Right now, we're going to focus on making sure that we save as many lives as possible. Here's exactly what we're going to do. And this is actually really key. I think leaders should just acknowledge we're not perfect. Invariably, there's going to be stuff that we missed, and there's going to be things that there's a category of things that we just messed up on. There's a category of things that we didn't see, but it's reasonable that we didn't anticipate them. So we're going to look to get better from it. And then there's things that were just completely outside of our control. I think if I just saw leaders expressing more humility and just saying, hey, look, like there are areas where we actually messed up, especially when they're obvious. For me personally, as a voter, they would win a lot more credibility with me. But for some reason in politics, it's like, I, I guess maybe there's this unspoken assumption that the worst thing that you can say is, I'm sorry, my bad, I made a mistake, which is insane to me because we all make mistakes. I don't expect any politician to make perfect decisions. I don't expect any leader to make perfect decisions. What I expect is for a leader to try their best and be humble and honest when they made a mistake and there's somewhere that they can improve. So that's what I would like to see. And I actually suspect that there's a readiness for this within the American culture of like leaders who are just like humble and honest and clearly trying their best. And I expect that the first politician to like really grasp this and to stop with the constant performance, there will be people who resonate with that. And hopefully that person will get elected and it'll start a movement, or maybe many such people will emerge. But yeah, I mean, that's what you do as an adult, right? Like as an adult, when there's some sort of dispute and you're responsible for the outcome, you acknowledge, oh, maybe there's something I can learn here, and maybe there's something I did poorly. And as a leader, it can be hard to sit with the fact that, yeah, you make decisions that are going to impact human lives. And the higher up you are in government, the more it's going to impact human lives. But that's what I would like to see: an acknowledgement of the pain, an acknowledgement of the need to figure out what's going on, and a commitment to what that's going to look like, whether it's a commission or some sort of report, and then personal ownership by leaders and saying, yeah, and to the extent that this was something preventable, I take responsibility for that, and we're going to figure out how much of this was preventable. That would be the best. But unfortunately, politics is a popularity contest, and often the way to win these popularity contests is to point the blame at the other party. And that's a reflection of us as people, because we all get caught up in it. We all get caught up in emotional outrage and tribalism and immediately jumping to conclusions. And it's just human nature. It's in all of our nature. But we want to appeal to the better angels of our nature by trying to take a moment to, even if we want to respond quickly, like I get that very few people are going to wait for a week to give their take. At least do some time to do some research. And when doing that research, try to look for the view that counters your own view so that you're bringing nuance into whatever take you're introducing to the culture. At least trying to do that will move us a lot further along. So great question, Mark, and that's my answer. All right, got space for maybe one more comment before we talk about Elon and Trump, and then we leave. So Epstein stuff. Yep, seeing a lot of frustration over the Epstein situation. Someone asked, what do they call the deep state? Good question. So yeah, deep state just sounds so conspiratorial and dark, right? So here's a simpler way of saying it. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but let's say that the executive branch is 20,000 people work within the executive branch. Let's say that, right? And just, there's a legislative branch that has Congress, and then you have congressional staffers and all the supporting structures. Then you have the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court and the federal courts and all the supporting staffers. There's the executive branch, which is headed up by, of course, the president. That, let's say 20,000 roles. Actually, let's make the number simpler. Let's say it's 10,000 people in the executive branch. Let's say only about 10 to 20% of the executive branch is actually directly elected or appointed by the American people. So when we shifted from Biden to Trump, part of the executive branch, that 10 to 20%, changed because Trump gets in and then he puts in place a new cabinet and they fire some people and they hire some people and they might even shut down entire teams. But there's still 80 to 90% of the executive branch that is federal agencies and departments that are not directly accountable to the American people. This is what people are talking about when they talk about bureaucracy. So it's that group of bureaucrats that are unelected. That unelected bureaucracy is the deep state. Now, deep state is one of those words like truth and love that is so overloaded that it kind of means different things to everyone. But that's a definition of a deep state that I think is the most practical. And the concern is that because you have a whole bunch of unelected bureaucrats, it doesn't really matter what party is in power or what president's in power. there's a group that is fundamentally does not have to be transparent or directly accountable to the American people because they're appointed, not elected. And some of them were appointed maybe a decade or 20 years ago. And these are the kind of people who, I'm sure the vast majority of them are good people, but that's where the security vulnerabilities are in democracy. That's a deep state. Hopefully that answered it for you. Yeah, here's a good question. Thank you for the unemotional inquiry here from Gabrielle. Only two people held accountable, maybe because Epstein is/was not at the top of the ring. So, justice, we should find those people, but will they be protected forever because it could incriminate folks on both sides? That's a great question. Yeah, and that's what I think. Like, if Pam Bondi said, hey, there's no Epstein client list, that said, this is a criminal conspiracy and we take it really seriously. And we see that it hasn't been taken seriously across the Biden or the Trump one or the Obama administration. But now we have a whole new team and we're going to get to the bottom of this. That would be satisfying. But instead, they're saying, hey, there's no client list and we've been transparent and that's it. And yeah, it's very hard to believe that only Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein were coordinating this. There had to be other people involved. So it keeps on bringing us back to the core question, which is why have only two people gone to prison over this? And maybe the honest truth from Pam Bondi is, hey, look, I know there's more people. We just don't have the evidence to find it. Sorry. At least that would be honest. It would be really devastating. But right now we have frustration and conspiracies. Again, I think we just need leaders to be more honest about the limitations of their power if that's what they're actually running up against. Because in the absence of that, it just sounds like a bunch of posturing. It sounds like you said that you had something and now you're saying you don't have anything. And it just looks really dishonest and it breaks trust with the American people. So personally, I can hold a lot of space for imperfection. I don't hold a lot of space for posturing because posturing is dishonest. All right, let's see if there's any more comments before I keep going here. And just shout out to my regulars. It's just cool when I see I have regulars like LeBlanc Dahlia or Nex or Lizzie Liz. I appreciate you guys just being here consistently. Thank you for doing that. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the Elon Trump feud, fallout, and Elon's recent announcement that he's going to be starting the American Party. For those of you who are not in the know on this, the story is pretty simple. Over 4th of July weekend, Elon put out a poll asking people, do they think it's time for a new party? And then on Saturday, he said, we're starting a new party. It's the America Party. Now, we'll see how committed Elon is to this endeavor, but let's just assume that he is committed to this endeavor. What's the reason why he wants to have the America Party? Just so we understand where this is even coming from. Elon believes, and I think in his view, when Trump's big, beautiful bill was passed, it reaffirmed the belief that neither the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party are really serving the people, particularly when it comes to fiscal responsibility. And Elon has been pounding the table for at least a year now about, hey, we need to rein in our debt, we need to rein in our deficit, and if we don't, we're going to go bankrupt as a country. And I think Elon is correct. Our spending is out of control. Our growth and revenue is not keeping up with it. We're at $37 trillion of debt. I haven't seen either the Republicans or the Democrats seriously try to tackle that problem. So we got to try something, because if we don't try something now with foresight, we're going to end up in a situation where people are abandoning American debt. People are selling U.S. treasuries. The U.S. dollar is no longer trusted. And we enter this inflationary debt spiral that is incredibly hard to recover from. And by the time that you have the political will to do that, because we're in a crisis situation, it might be too late. So I think that's a fair framing of some of Elon's position. And I think he was really disappointed at the big, beautiful bill, because the big, beautiful bill actually raises the debt ceiling so that we can spend even more money, $4 billion. No, sorry, $4 trillion, if only we're only $4 billion. And he's concerned that no one is taking the problem seriously. Now, to go back in time here, let's remember, Trump was not talking about crushing the debt and crushing the deficit. That actually only really became part of the MAGA agenda when Elon entered the scene. Because on July 13th, which by the way is only a few days ago, a few days from now, so we're about to hit the 1 year anniversary of Trump nearly getting killed, which is it's going to be an interesting day to reflect on that. Trump, that was not part of his core platform. His core platform was about immigration. Let's get the economy booming. Let's end these foreign wars, and let's make America great again, more generally. Elon came in and he sort of made the tent even bigger. And Elon came in talking about, hey, we need to get the government efficient. We need to stop spending so much. We need to cut out the government waste, fraud, and abuse. Why does that matter? Well, I think honestly, crushing the debt and deficit is less of a priority for Trump than it is for Elon. And I think Elon is correct. It needs to be more of a priority. And I think in an ideal world, Elon and Trump are doing this together. That's what the promise of Doge was, that Trump gives Elon air cover to go into the government, really turn it inside out, modernize it, and make it something that actually is spending money intelligently for the American people. And it did that to some extent. I don't know what the current estimations are on how much money they save. I think it was 117 billion last time I looked in May, which is pretty substantial if they actually manage to concretize all of those changes. But it needs to be, some of them needs to be passed by Congress. But their goal is 1 trillion. If they fall short of 1 trillion, that's a failure. So we can still have, it can be good and still be a failure at the same time. So Elon looks at this budgeting process and this big, beautiful bill and says, look, none of these people are going to work for the people. I'm going to start a new party. And long term, I like the fact that Elon is starting the America Party. I think it's important to have some influence in our government that forces both the Democrats and the Republicans to listen to the middle of the country who's not strong right, not strong left, and has just common sense policies that they feel like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are overlooking. Because by the way, before MAGA, I was completely checked out. I thought politics was super dumb. I thought both parties were completely worthless. And yeah, when the whole Make America Great movement in 2024, when it coalesced, I had hope. I had hope that we could have actual major change. And I think we are making significant changes. And I think there's areas where good progress is being made. I'm happy the border was closed. I like what Trump is doing in terms of pressuring Netanyahu to make peace in Gaza. I like that he's been trying to normalize relationships with Russia so that we don't have to have this arch enemy. Like, we need to have a forever war with Russia forever and fund it with hundreds of billions of dollars. I like directionally where he's going. I like that he's rewriting the trade relationship that we have with a lot of countries. And I like that we're recorrecting the economic balance more from globalism toward nationalism. But none of that is about balancing the budget. And I don't think either party is going to take it seriously. Enter the America Party. Now, here's my concern about the America Party. I don't think the reason that we don't have people cutting spending is because we don't have the right party in place. The reason we're not cutting spending is because the American people don't want to cut spending. Just straight up. It is enormously unpopular to make cuts. Everyone likes the idea of responsibility. No one likes the idea of personal sacrifice. Let me ask you guys, if you couldn't eat out for 6 months and you had to get a cheaper car, would you be willing to do that to get our deficit to zero and to pay down our debt? Just honestly. If you would, seriously, that's very noble. I like to think that I would. I don't actually know. Right? I don't actually know. If I believe that it would actually work, yeah. But given our current government, it's totally understandable why no one wants to make a personal sacrifice. Because we're not even confident that the government's good with the money that we do give them. So why should we spend less money in our personal lives for that? So the reason I'm telling you this is because I think it's deeper than a political problem. I think it's a cultural problem. We've created a culture where we prioritize short-term pleasure over long-term gain. We created a culture where we don't encourage people to delay gratification. It's get what you want now. It's take out debt to get a useless degree in college. It's Go, just follow your dreams. You're entitled to success no matter what. It's you can do whatever you want if you just set your mind to it. And if you don't succeed, then it's because the government screwed you over, or white people screwed you over, or men screwed you over, or colonialism screwed you over. We don't encourage a culture of individual responsibility and temperance and austerity and stoicism. So aside from the cultural problem, we also have a collective action problem. Because imagine this, right? I live in LA. If an LA politician said, I'm running on a campaign of reducing the federal debt and deficit, and I'm going to cut LA services for that, I can't imagine that person ever getting elected. It's like the most unattractive, losing political strategy ever. Why? Because no one wants to think about losing things. I mean, right now, we don't even have a collective idea that America is a place worth loving. Like I'm not even concerned. I'm not even convinced that most people in America have any American pride left. So we have a culture where honestly we're encouraging a lot of selfishness and a lot of short-term thinking. We're not teaching people, hey, look, life is hard, life is tough, but you're tough too, and you can rise above your circumstances. And if you're smart about your spending and you delay gratification and you don't take on debt and you make smart decisions and you take on roles that actually teach you real skills that can add to society, you can make something of yourself. We don't teach that. So until we have a seismic shift in consciousness in the culture of America, we're not going to get on board with cutting spending. Moreover, we've built this entire edifice of entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare that are, yeah, like people have spent their whole life anticipating they're going to be able to cash in on one day. So it's great to talk about balancing the budget, but who's going to get elected on that platform? It's very difficult. And I don't think someone just being part of the America Party is going to change that. I think politicians are responding to incentives, and those incentives are set by the people. So it's a problem that you and me, all of us, are part of the problem. We can also be part of the solution, though. How do we become part of the solution? My personal belief is that education is actually the highest leverage lever for changing society. And we need to be teaching like self-reliance and personal responsibility, and we need to be teaching kids critical thinking and how to be resourceful. And yeah, if you get like a gender studies degree and you take out $200,000 worth of debt, you better have a really great plan for how you're going to pay off that debt, because it's not going to be at a high paying job. These are not the honest conversations we have with people. So instead, we infantilize people. We don't teach people good financial discipline. And I say this as someone who I have debt, right? And I wish I didn't have debt. I'm learning, I'm growing as a man and learning to become more financially responsible. I wasn't taught this. I wasn't taught it in school. I wasn't taught it by my parents either. And I had great parents. I don't think they knew it either. Like, I don't think they were taught this stuff. In fact, they weren't even raised in America. You know, they came from Africa. They lived in a third world country, and they managed to rise above their station and come to America and rise above their station again, which is amazing. But yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that's missing in the culture that prepares people to be strong, independent, long-term thinkers who have the emotional constitution to make the right decisions. That's what we actually need to change. Now, all that said, this is where I think Elon's America Party can be really helpful in being a part of that change. I do think that we don't need everyone in the country to be on board with this agenda of individualism and being responsible and stoicism and taking pleasure in restraint rather than consumption. We only need a small fraction of Congress to be like that. Because if you look at these votes, I mean, what was it? The big, beautiful bill passed by like one vote, two at most. That shows you that the margins are razor thin. So if you even can get 2 senators and like 5 Congress people, what do they call them? I guess senators are technically Congress people, right? Because they're in Congress. So members of the House of Representatives to be a part of the America Party. And somehow those people, and this is the hard part, like where can they even get elected from? Like, what is there a policy in America where there's enough people, policy is a fancy word. Is there a district in America where there's enough people who are on board with these values that someone with these values could actually get elected? That's what you need to actually find. Like, is there a place in America where they would actually resonate with the idea of, yeah, we need to take personal responsibility, and I'm actually willing to lose benefits in my region for the greater good of America? If we can carve out a sliver of people in Congress who represent those values, I think that that will actually force both the Republicans and the Democrats to get those people on board with major pieces of legislation that are deadlocked, and that can help be a bit of a like a like a log jam in Congress that, is not going to revolutionize Congress, but it'll actually create some budget conscious decision making, at least. Because right now it feels like the decision making is almost completely budget unconscious. There's a few people like Thomas Massey or Rand Paul or Ron Paul who, they get on X and they say it's really important, but largely I don't think most senators and Congress people are trying to rein in the deficit and the debt, because that's not what gets them elected. So in conclusion, it's not an issue of parties, it's an issue of incentives. And incentives are downstream of culture. The biggest thing we need to do is change culture. And to Elon's credit, he has an enormous platform that I do think has been shifting culture. I think the MAGA with Elon in it is different than the MAGA with Elon out of it. So I wouldn't bet against Elon's ability to shift the culture just enough to get a few people in Congress, which could change whether big bills like this get passed without budget consciousness. And it saddens me that Elon's not doing this with Trump, but I think at this point that bridge is already effectively burned. And I think even irrespective of Trump, I mean, look, Trump's not going to be president forever. So even if you align with Trump right now, there's going to be presidents who come after who are very establishment and just keep the machine rolling. So even if you think Trump is not the establishment, plenty of establishment presidents are coming. And I think it's important to have the American Party there as a check on the establishment. So, yeah, do I think it's going to become the next major political party commanding 30% of the vote? It's pretty unlikely, because I think the things it stands on are just inherently unpopular and go against most people's way of reasoning about how they vote. I think most people vote to benefit themselves, not to benefit the long-term health of American fiscal policy. But I think this can help. So that's my position on it. And yeah, now that I talk about it, I'm actually a little bit more optimistic than I was about the American Party. So I think it's a good idea, and I'm glad that Elon's doing it. All right, let's do the chat one more time before we go. Got 8,000 people here. Damn, it makes me sad to leave all of y'all, but this is going to be the last 5 minutes because I got to get about my day. All right, let's jump in here. See some of the good comments. Debatable asked, do you think Islam is compatible with Western values, or is it a danger to it? I believe it's a danger because of people trying to mimic Muhammad's life, and the Quran and Hadith condone it. Well, this is not at all related to the American Party, but you phrased the question nicely and you capitalize things properly. I just appreciate it when someone puts effort into their comments. So I'm going to address it just really quickly because I do think it's important to say. I am not an Islamic scholar. I've never read the Quran. I'm just speaking extemporaneously just to give you a perspective. I want you to take this with a grain of salt. I just want to invite you to a different way of thinking about this. There are 3.5 to 4, there are 3 to 4 million Muslims in America right now. And the vast majority of them have never caused any problems, and they are sufficiently aligned with American values to live here. There are also 2 billion Muslims in the world. Islam is a gigantic religion. Just like Christianity has various sects like the Lutherans and the Protestants and the Catholics, Islam has various sects as well. For example, at one extreme, the radical Islamists who believe that government and the and religion should be intertwined, and that government should be based on Sharia law, and that's the right way to run a country. That's what some of these people believe. Then you have people who are less extreme, but they're more like fundamentalist, but they, for whatever reason, don't support Sharia law. And maybe fundamentalist is the wrong term, but more conservative, but they don't support Sharia law. Then there are people who are more progressive, and there are places that actually outright reject Islamism. For instance, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they ban extremism. In fact, they take a even harder line stance on it than the US. And then on the, let's say, the far left version of Islam might be people who say, yeah, we don't want women to wear head coverings. Maybe they're not that super devout in many ways, in ways that the Quran specifically enjoins them to be devout. And they are more compatible with Western values. So the reason I'm saying this is because there's, of course, a subset of Muslims who are very compatible with Western values. But there are absolutely things in the Quran that are not compatible with Western values. There are absolutely things within Islamic culture more broadly that are not compatible with Western values. So the question is there any part of the Muslim population that's compatible with the Muslim Western values? Obviously, absolutely. They're here. They've been living here largely peacefully for a long time. I think it's really important to acknowledge that group, because when I see people talking about Islam, it's like people are like, it's very hostile. It's not recognizing like there are shades of Islam here. But yeah, there may be an interpretation of the text, or it might even be an unavoidable, like, no, it literally says certain things in the Quran that are not compatible with America. And I would point out there are probably things incompatible with America in every holy text. I'm pretty sure there are things in the Bible that you cannot follow literally in America because it's antithetical to the Constitution. It's like literally just against our laws. So there's a reason we have separation of church and state. And it's okay for our culture to be influenced by religion. It's not okay for religious law to make its way into the Constitution, or the way that we even make local laws. So that's my answer. Hope that was satisfying to you. LeBlanc Dahlia said, I never mentioned the rescissions bill. Yeah, so this is a good note to bring. So there's multiple types of budget bills that Congress passes. There's something called the rescissions bill, and the rescissions bill is where the Doge cuts would actually be instated. So regardless of how you feel about the big beautiful bill, the big beautiful bill was not the place to concretize cuts that Elon and Doge recommended and then were ratified by the government departments. That happens later in the year in the rescissions bill. So good clarification, LeBlanc Dahlia. Okay, let's see. Gonna get to one, maybe two more comments before we leave here. Aurora Sky. This is a good comment from Aurora Sky. The American Party's smart, laser-focused strategy targets weak GOP candidates to gain influence, but with minimal effort, potentially reshaping politics. Yes, and as I mentioned before, that would be the best outcome for the American Party, to be laser-focused on specific districts where there's a chance of the American Party winning. There's still the incentive problem. Like, how do you win in a district if your platform is based on spend less, which means spend less in your district too? Right? Like, you can't campaign on a platform of, hey, we're going to save money by taking away money from other districts, but my district, your guy's going to get everything. It's like, no, like, we got to either all be in this together or all out. So we need to have a sense of collective ownership of America and the problems in America. So yeah, I'm curious to hear, I would like to hear Elon's thoughts on, hey, how are we actually going to, given that this rides against the incentives of a lot of people, how are we going to make it appealing? And I think this is more of a marketing question. The American Party needs to appeal to an identity, right? And I like even the name American Party. It needs to appeal to an identity of America, and America means, like, being a patriot needs to mean self-sacrifice. Like, hey, yeah, I'm willing for my individual life to be harder for a shorter period of time, for our collective life to be better for a longer period of time. I'm willing to spend less money in my lifetime so that my kids don't inherit my problems. It's possible for sure, but it's a hearts and it's a culture, spirit, and hearts problem, not like a governance problem. So, Elon's an incredibly smart guy. I'm sure he's been thinking about this, but I think that's what I would need to see in his discussions with the America Party to make it sound like something that could actually be effective. Because yeah, I don't see Trump pushing for massive cuts. I don't think this is a matter of like, oh, it's just like we just need a few different senators in there. It's like, no, Trump is not leading the party in a direction of let's make a bunch of cuts. And I think, in fairness to Trump and his administration, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that they have a 3-3-3 policy. So reduce the deficit to 3% of GDP, get above 3% GDP growth, and I'm forgetting the last three. I always forget the last three. But the crux of it is, hey, we need to grow the economy. That's our solution to decreasing the deficit. And we should certainly aim to grow the economy, and certainly that will help control the deficit if we don't just spend more money. But it's hard to guarantee growth. It's easy to guarantee cuts to spending. So I would like to see just more fiscal discipline, but discipline is not attractive. So we got to figure out how to make that a more attractive thing. And I think it's by making it patriotic to be disciplined, making it patriotic. And I think it's actually a very masculine thing to say, yeah, I'm going to forego today so that I can have tomorrow. I'm going to prioritize the future over the present. That's a cultural shift we need to have. So yeah, frugality, practicality, Donna said, yep. Beauty of the ordinary, beautifully said. I like that. So yeah, as I talk, I'm actually selling myself on the America Party in real time. So that's good. It's nice to feel inspired by something. Okay, guys, that's it for today. I'm back, so I'll be back on Wednesday as well for another episode of Nuance Live. I started a little late today just because, well, life happens, and we have a road closure in my neighborhood, and so the road's closed and it takes a long time to get home. But I will be back 1 p.m. Wednesday, and it's good to be back. Let me know what you guys think of the stream by commenting below, and I will see you Wednesday. Peace.